Good evening, ladies and gentlemen out there in the interwebs. This is Matt Carter coming for another, what I've come to call Carter's Commentaries. My last one was one about our first responders and mental health and uh, navigating through. And a lot of what drives me on that are some very specific and personal circumstances. And we all have a set of personal baggage. Um, that's just part of living life. And then you get into this first responder business, and you're invariably going to end up with stressors and trauma as a result of being involved. And what I try to remind folks um, about is that there's typically a combination of these things, and then we try from home and from work. And then what we try to do is convince ourselves that we can keep those things separate. I talk a lot about kind of how a computer, and we can section off areas of the computer, and the computer can be told to not acknowledge another area of storage. And uh, I think we foolishly and hopefully think that our brains will do the same thing. The reality is what happens at work influences home, and what happens at home influences work. And I like to share that May 22nd for me is a huge intersection of my work life and my personal life. And it isn't just May 22nd, it's May 22nd of 2010. And I'm going to put a couple of images up of why that is for me. There's two people, and I got to give you a little background, I suppose, to for folks that don't know, and why I'm talking about these two people in particular. So, my dad was an only child, and he got real sick when I was 6, and then passed away when I was 12. Um, and as I got a little older, he was an only child. I was the oldest of his kids. So this gray-haired lady you see is my grandmother. That was his mom, and she lived to be just a month shy of 96. She passed away on May 2nd of 2010, and we had had her living in a retirement community for 5 or 6 years, I guess. But she had spent 40 plus years of her life in San Angelo. So that's where my dad is buried. That's where my grandfather's buried. And that's where she wanted to be buried. So we did that. But because she had spent the last 5, 6 years of her life in a retirement community in Sugarland, we wanted to do a memorial service or mass. She was Catholic. So we did a memorial mass at the retirement community. And we did it there because it made it easier for her friends that had mobility issues. And we commemorated her life, not so much about death. I always think that's so important, is that we commemorate and celebrate the life. Goodness, man, when you live to be 95, you have lived life, and I hope I get close to that. But we did that May 22nd of 2010, and we did that. It was started at 10 o'clock in the morning. Unbeknownst to me, almost simultaneously, about 9:45 that same morning, there was a bank robbery call that took place in our county, and it was actually in the city of Sugarland, but where it was real close to the edge of the city limits and into unincorporated Fort Bend County. And all hands on deck when something like that goes down. These guys happen to be, not that we knew it at the time, but they were folks that the FBI had been trying to track. And so I like to say it took a badass local street cop to catch them and do something that the FBI couldn't do. But the picture that you see, for those that don't know, is a gentleman and a friend of mine by the name of Charlie Scott, and most would call him Scotty. I always call him. Generally, I called him Charlie. I met Charlie when I was a sergeant in the training academy, and he came on as a cadet. He was very strong and powerful personality, and an incredibly gifted leader. He had a lot of gifts, to be honest. But even though he wasn't necessarily an official class officer, everybody he made everybody toe the line. It's just who he was, and I knew there was something special about him. He had his daughter was born Carly was born during the cadet class, and I don't know that he even missed an hour of time. He just thought that he was supposed to be at work. Before he came to us, he had been a professional ball player. Some injuries caught up with him, and so he got to live the second dream of his life, which was becoming a police officer. I got to know his wife, Christy, and their two daughters, Carissa and Carly. Um, and just kind of a friendship grew. It was just different. Scotty was different. Anybody that knows him knows how different, especially was. Um, but Scotty found the bank robbers, stopped or attempted to stop the bank robbers, and they had a pretty sophisticated plan. Had put the cash into a Gatorade bucket with water to disable tracking devices if they were inside the bags with the money, or in the event that there were dye packs, they were going to explode in the Gatorade pack, not on them. But they also had a setup where if they were going to get stopped by the police, they were going to kick the back door open and fire rounds on whoever was trying to stop them. And in this instance, it happened to be Scotty. Uh, Scotty got hit with rounds in the head and the arm, and I don't know many folks that can take rounds from an AK-47 and survive. They fired at him about 15 times, and three of them hit him. He nearly bled to death. The round that hit his head actually caused some pretty significant damage, but really for a round coming from an AK, he it's miraculous. It hit the front of the skull, but it fractured a bit of the skull, but the round separated, and then the projectile went in a bunch of different directions. Some of it got stuck behind his eye. Some of it went out the side of his scalp. But fortunately, it wasn't a full penetration of his scalp or his head, and he survived. It was a long rehabilitative effort. But the way I found out, I actually believed who gets shot three times from an AK-47 and lives. So here I am, May 22nd of 2010. At the same time, I'm commemorating again for the second time the passing and the life of my grandmother, who, of course, her passing just kind of reminds me of all the loss and tragedy from my dad's passing and growing up without him being in my life the way I'm certain he didn't intend, and nor did my mom. And then after that's over, I go out to the car to a phone that has got more phone calls missed than I could count, warm from having rang so much, and to hear that Scotty had been shot. And honestly, I thought he was probably life flighted as a courtesy. And we do what we do, and we try to go to work. Try to put cadets, because they were my responsibility at the time, and made them available in the event that we needed them for evidence preservation or collection or scene security. Um, because after they shot Scotty, they went on about a 10-mile running gunfight with a whole bunch of our deputies. Um, the picture of Scotty there in the uniform is when he's being acknowledged. The man got more awards than any of us could probably count, and he deserved even more. It's just amazing. Not only did he survive, but what was forecasted to be an 18-month, maybe 2 year recovery and rehab, because he was so mentally tough, and probably intimidated his physician. He was back at work in 3 months. Um, Now, I say all that to say that 2010 was a year where my work life and my personal life, using these two pieces as really the example. I don't know how more connected it could be. Good Lord knew what He was doing when He made these moments in time for me cross, because He knew I was going to use them to talk about what was to come. But right as Scotty was coming back to work in August of 2010, I actually had my first anxiety attack while I was teaching a class, and that started a whole journey for me on having to navigate what it meant to have to manage. PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder, and I use these two instances of work and home colliding. So I've spent time to set this up to say that one, May 22nd means a lot to a lot of people I know. If you ask my family, it's certainly something we're going to think about. My favorite gray haired lady in tennis shoes, who is undoubtedly singing the Notre Dame Victory March behind the gates, and um, celebrating um, the afterlife and in paradise and heaven. I don't know that I knew a more faithful or happy person. Always just so kind. And if anybody were to compare me to her in that way, I'd be very happy. And then, when you get into my work relationships, Scotty not only worked for us, he ended up going to another police agency in Fort Bend County, um, and then to an agency in Harris County. But a little over a year ago, February of last year, I think what happened in May of 2010 finally put him in a spot where, after years of us worshiping him as a hero, um, I think we put a burden on him after that incident that made it very difficult for him to bear. And from my perspective, that's one of the things that bothers me the most is we didn't let him just go back to being Scotty, but he took his life. And I don't know. We talked. He knew the struggles I had. I understood a little bit of the struggles he had, and um, I hope that he always knew I was there for him if he needed. But we ended up in different places for different reasons, and I'm not trying to compare my experiences to Scotty's, but uh, it certainly had an impact that he chose to stop the pain and the trauma. And that affected me in ways I never expected either. Um, the the big point of this video, probably some therapy for my own peace of mind, but is to remind us that it's really hard to pull apart work and home. Our brains don't work that way, um, and if you're trying to tell yourself they do, you're you're trying to convince your brain of something it cannot do. That's not the way it's going to operate, no matter how hard you try. You're a whole person, and you're a whole person at work and at home. And you're not halves or parts of a person at either one of those places. So, um, May 22nd was of 2010, a very specific May 22nd, was uh, very clear that I couldn't pretend to keep work and home separate, and that work and home had a huge impact on who I am, but also where my wellness is. And so as I do a video like this again, just you're going to see it, and it's going to come across platform. And if you know me from work, um, you've probably heard variations of this story in some training at some point. Um, but there's a way, there's a path. You can manage those demons, those difficulties, and those struggles. And I'm not saying I'm the guy that can tell you how to do it, but I know that it can be done. And if you want someone to walk that walk with you, those platforms are a way to reach out. And if we've encountered each other for any length of time, I've probably provided other means too, whether by email or a phone call, text message. So don't try to walk that walk alone if it's a struggle. Um, that's that's um, that's okay to be struggling. Go ahead and ask for that help. And if it ain't from me, let it be from someone else close. Nobody wants to see you fail. Nobody wants to see you hurt. Nobody wants to see you in pain. Nobody wants to see you struggle, that cares about you. So get that person you know that cares about you, and start taking those steps with the battle buddy. Appreciate the time. Y'all be safe.